What's up everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and that you're following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about encounters with things that you just normally don't think should exist. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. Okay, so this is short, but I don't really know where to start. So I was driving down a back road on our res in Idaho, Shoshone Bannock tribes, the Fort Hall Reservation. It was about 1:30 a.m. I was trying to get to town before the 2 a.m. closing time. I had just come from another town in another county that closes early, and my friend was sober driving me. So we were driving along, maybe going about 50 down this road, when all of a sudden we saw something get close to the road on the left side shoulder, so we slowed down to a stop. And then the thing, grayish, whitish thing, walked across the road in front of us. It looked at us and snarled. It had sharp teeth and looked almost like a werewolf, like it was ugly as hell. We both looked at each other and were like, go. Then, in one fell swoop, it jumped into a tree about 15 feet high on the right side. We hauled ass, and then, seconds later, something flew over us. It was an owl-like creature with wings. We don't know if it transformed into a big owl thing or what. We didn't care. We just wanted to get away. I couldn't tell you when, but eventually it just stopped following us. After I told a few people, they said that maybe it was a gargoyle. Have you ever heard about gargoyles? Scary stuff, whatever it was. I had this experience when I was 19 years old. I was staying in the winter with my uncle. Now he lives in the far north of Ontario. I think the nearest town from where he was then is about less than 1,000 people. In fact, 1,000 would be very generous, and this town was about 35 to 45 minutes away. It was a huge property. Part of the property there was a forest, and this was on the Canadian Shield, so it backs up onto a river at the base of a cliff or ravine, and underneath this property, or at least that area, there's a large cave system. There are many openings in the cliff face to get into these caves. So it was the middle of November, and I was bored, so I decided to go hiking to these caves. My uncle tells me to be back by sundown and to be careful of animals near the caves. He gives me a survival kit and bear mace. I don't have a big gun because it's Canada. I bring a lunch of a steak sandwich. I take the overgrown trail down to the river, and then I follow this river for about 30 minutes just to get to the caves. I see a big cave that I'm going to go eat lunch in. I walk up to the cave. There's garbage everywhere, but it's mostly food wrappers, no bottles or anything. I also see things that no animal would be interested in, like light bulbs, pens. I take the bear mace out of my pack and move closer to the cave. I was thinking that there could have been like some hoarder hillbilly up here, but it smells like a basement in there, but kind of more awful if you get what I mean. I catch movement in my peripheral vision while I'm in the cave. I turn to see a white blur dart behind some brush right near the entrance. As I stop, it then dawns on me that it's dead quiet. In fact, I can't exactly remember the last force noise that I heard, and since I'm now at a decline, this thing has the high ground. I realize my only option is really to try and run. So that's what I do. As I'm running, I hear a very loud thud and then a screech near the cave. I glance back and see this being. It has to be 2.5 meters or 8 feet tall, and it has weird proportions. Its legs seem almost too small for its body. It has long arms and claws, a domed head. The farther you go up its body, the wider it gets. If I had to guess, this thing's focus was mainly on upper strength, like it primarily walks on all fours, but it also had claws like I mentioned. The more I stared at it, the more it just didn't make sense to me. But there I was, frozen with fear, looking it up and down constantly. I could feel it staring angrily at me with pure hatred. All I can do is draw my bear mace again. This thing takes one step toward me. I turn and book it. There's thumping and crunching of snow, and it's really quickly gaining on me. As I turn and glance at it, it seems to be doing some kind of sideways shuffle on all fours. The only idea that I have is to throw my lunch. The chasing noise stops. I glance back. It took the bait and is going back toward the cave. I keep running. The last thing I see is it from behind is going back towards where all the garbage was, but it's glancing back at me. I get back to my uncle's house. He's standing on the porch with a shotgun. He tells me to get the F in the house, and he doesn't come in for another 3 hours. Afterwards, I can tell he's breathing a sigh of relief. He comes in, grabs some booze and sits down. He tells me that I met what he calls the winter man. It stays in the caves when it's above freezing cold outside. It takes everything it can and usually makes some kind of seasonal nest. Most of the time it's just littered garbage outside of a cliff face. Rarely does it ever approach lone houses like my uncle's, but only then it tries to get into sheds or garages. My uncle has had to shoot at this thing in previous winters when it comes near the house. He's only seen it a handful of times in the over 20 years that he lived out there. He mostly sees it wandering around in the brush, but it never acted aggressive, unless he was near its nest, of course, which I happened to be. It's also never chased him past a certain radius around the nest. He then tells me that for the rest of the winter, I should avoid the river area, and said that I was safe to go pretty much anywhere else. After that, he never spoke of it again. I saw it a few more times even, but it was just a glimpse, and even then, it was just skulking around that same back area of the woods. I brought it up to my uncle a few times since then, but he just ignores me or switches the topic. Clearly, he doesn't want to talk about it. I don't remember the exact year, but this would have been the mid-80s. My best guess is 1985 or 1986. It was a summer evening around Oak Hill, West Virginia. Oak Hill is a small town in the south-central part of the state. It's about 15 minutes from Beckley, West Virginia, or about a 1-hour drive from Charleston, West Virginia. I had to be between 7 to 8 years old at the time. I was outside playing with my brother, who was 1 year younger than me, and our neighbor, a boy named Roy, who was the same age as my brother, give or take a couple months. We lived in a very rural area, which at the time, we probably had 3 to 4 neighbors within a 1-mile radius, and we effectively lived on the edge of the woods, down a dirt road, probably half a mile from a real road, so there weren't many people around. It was dusk, and we were throwing rocks to bats. Today, it might seem strange, but back then it was something that kids in the area did. Bats are common in the area, and around dusk in the summer, they were out in force to catch bugs. You'll see dozens of them, and they usually fly approximately 40 feet off the ground or less. If you throw a really small rock high in the air, you can often get a bat to swoop down and catch your rock, presumably thinking it's a bug. It's interesting to think of the things that kids did before there was internet, and we only had ABC and PBS on the TV back then, so this was entertainment at its finest. At any rate, we're throwing rocks to bats when we see what we at first thought was a monstrous bat flying higher in the sky than the others. I don't remember who spotted it first, but once it was pointed out, we were stunned. After staring at it for a few seconds, it was clear that this wasn't a bat. It was something else. It was a creature in the shape of a man, but with wings. It had wings exactly like that of a bat, distinct arms and legs. Also, it was mostly gliding, with only the occasional flap of its wings, which is unlike a bat, which constantly flaps its wings, and its arms were sort of lazily hanging behind it at its side. It looked tall, but lanky, but it was too high in the sky to really get a good estimate of size. I know that even today, it's really easy to get size estimates really wrong on objects that are flying, like large birds. I can also say that it was dark, but I couldn't tell you anything about coloration. It was dusk, and the light was relatively low by that point, and the way we were seeing it was kind of half like a silhouette. We saw a head, but never a face. I don't think it was looking down. My best estimate is that it was 2 to 2.5 times as high as the bats, so that would probably put it at around 100 feet off the ground, but I could easily be way off. It wasn't a detail I was focused on at the time. We watched this creature for a little while, maybe 15 seconds or so. We were totally transfixed, standing there with slack jaws, trying to comprehend what the hell we were seeing. And then we snapped out of it. We looked at each other and simultaneously we ran toward the house to get my dad. I remember my dad was home, but my mom wasn't. We ran inside and told him to come outside, now. We told him that we had seen the devil. Of course, we thought it was the devil. That's how we would have contextualized it within our very limited framework at the time. He told us that he was sure that we hadn't seen the devil, but he reluctantly decided to come outside and check. By the time he did, whatever it was gone. He reassured us with some platitudes, but he obviously didn't believe us. We were all pretty shaken by the sighting, and we talked about it for weeks afterwards. I slept in the bed with my parents that night, and for at least a week afterwards. This incident actually spurred my interest in the supernatural. Later, as a teenager, I learned about the Mothman sightings, and I wondered if that had been what we witnessed. With the West Virginia connection, it was natural to think that it may have been, but the descriptions never really fit perfectly, and we weren't very close to Point Pleasant. It wasn't until I read other people's reports that it became clear that others had been seeing exactly what I had seen. The Jeepers Creepers description really is the most fitting description I've ever seen. I have trouble reconciling what we saw with reality as I know it, but I'm sure that we saw something. Not really much to tell beyond that. My brother passed away many, many years ago, and I haven't spoken to Roy in probably as long. He's had some struggles with substance abuse as an adult, and that made me keep my distance. None of us discussed the incident since we were adults, though we did discuss it at some point in our teens. I expect we'll never really know what people are seeing, but I figured I would share mine anyways. So this happened to me back when I was a college student. I was home on break where I live in Maryland. And while back home, I met up with a couple of friends who were also into urbex like me. One of them tells me about Patapsco State Park. Apparently, there's some cool abandoned churches there, plus a lot of other pretty interesting stuff. We make plans to go out there. The plans fall through. My friends have to do something else that day. I think, well, I'm not going to be back home long enough for us to make another plan, so I'll just go by myself. And by this point, it was already a little bit later in the day than I'd want, but I had to wait for my friend before he eventually ditched me. So I get there. It's about 4 p.m. It's mid-November, so the sun's already kind of getting low. I park the car and start hiking. The first church is easy enough to find, a big white Protestant structure right off the parking area. I spend a bit of time screwing around in there. I climb a bit into the steeple, I go down the trail and I find more stuff that my friend said was there. I check out an old water cistern, then I check out an old car in a ditch. Further up, I find another old car in the ditch. And then, just as I'm thinking that this is pretty much the end of the road, I look up and I can see another church. This one makes a much nicer ruin, 100% stone, Catholic construction. The name on it is St. Stanislaus Kostka Catholic Church. It's about 6 p.m. by now. The valley's not in direct sun anymore, but the light's still pretty good. I go up to the church. I find one guy there with his girlfriend smoking weed. I make a lighthearted joke about them smoking weed in a church, and we kind of laugh, but then I go off by myself to check out the church. I'm an architecture guy, sue me. Eventually, the other guy and his girlfriend leave to go home or something. I notice a few stone blocks lying off in the woods a bit. I go to check those out, thinking that they're from the walls or something. I realize that they have writing on them. This is a cemetery. I start trying to read the graves. I hear a voice from off in the woods. Hey, man, what'd you find there? I thought it was the same guy as before. I say, I found a cemetery. Pretty cool, right? I look up, and it's not the guy that I was just talking to. It's some guy who appears to be wearing black sweatpants, a black hoodie, a black baseball cap, and sunglasses. Even though it's getting dark, he just has them on. I look at him and kind of raise an eyebrow. He says, yeah, man, can I come see? I said, I mean, it's not like I'm stopping you or anything. The guy laughs a bit. It's strange. I can't describe it all too well. It seemed a bit deep and to go on a bit too long. He said, yeah, but seriously, it's kind of hard to get in here. Can you help me a bit? As I looked around, the only thing that I could think of that was preventing him from coming in was maybe the thorn bushes. I guess I'll give him that. I said, yeah, I get up. I look over to him. There's no thorns barring him from getting in. He could literally just walk over to where I am. I step back a bit and keep staring at him, trying to figure out if I'm going to get knifed out here by a psycho. My friend is usually the one who carries when we're urbexing. I'm never back in Maryland long enough to make it worth getting the concealed carry permit. The guy thinks the hesitation is funny. He starts laughing again. He says, what's the matter, man? Are you scared or something? I said, yes, and then I corrected myself. No. He thinks this is even funnier. He says, come on, I'm not trying to hurt you. Just say that I can come in, and we're good. I stop and pause. He's kind of shuffling his feet along a sort of invisible line this whole time. I follow the line with my eyes. It matches with the line between a few of the cemetery's corner fence posts that are still intact. I realize that I may be in over my head here. Still, he can't enter. He grins and takes off his sunglasses. I said I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to get in there. Just say that I can come in. It's dark enough by now that I figure it's a good time to turn on my cell phone flashlight. Plus, now that his face is unobstructed, I want to get a better view of it. His eyes are dark, like 100% black. And then I notice something much worse. In the strong light of my flashlight, I can see straight through him to the woods beyond. I say, are you a ghost? He responds, kind of, something like that. I really didn't like the sound of that. I just take a seat on the ground. I figure as long as he can't get in, I'm safe right here. The guy then looks like he's no longer thinking this is funny. He says, so you're not going to let me in, I take it. I respond, probably not. He crosses his arms and takes a step back from the cemetery border. He kind of shrugs. Ah, well, it's not like you're the only one. He fades away right in front of my eyes as a strong wind picks up. The tree branch cracks and falls maybe 20 feet from the cemetery border. I decide that I am not going to go investigate that. I stay inside that cemetery for another 2 hours, turning off my phone light to save battery. Finally, I head out at about 10:30. I haven't heard anything in a while, and my battery is getting low. I was on basically DEFCON 1 all the way there, just in case I ran into whoever that was again, but I never do. My parents were pretty pissed that I was out that late, but whatever. It was honestly a really strange encounter. I was pretty scared when I saw his eyes, but I think I managed to do the right thing to get out of that situation. Looking back on it, I believe him that he was more interested in the cemetery than he was in me, but at that moment, I was thinking more that the cemetery was my only safe place at the moment, and that there was no telling what he would do if I let him in there. I also definitely believe that he basically allowed me to go, and that if he really wanted to, he could mess my shit up when I finally left. It seems like that church probably gets at least a few people a week, based on the other guy and his girlfriend, so his interest in me was mostly as a tool to let him break through the protection of the cemetery. One tool can usually substitute for another, so I basically was just one failed attempt in a series until he hit a success. I kind of wish it was a cooler encounter, but not everyone hits the supernatural jackpot. It was definitely scary as it was happening though. So these encounters were pretty strange, weren't they? If one of them stuck out to you, as always, let me know which one it was down in the comments. And if you'd like to, you can post an encounter of your own down in the comments, or send it to me at the email in the description. If you would like to support the channel in a different way that's not on YouTube, there's a PayPal and a Patreon link down there as well. But of course, super thanks here on YouTube. And just watching the video, liking the video, commenting and all that great stuff, it really helps the channel too. So with all of that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. I'll see you Friday.